Hey there, welcome to an ongoing series where we basically take the camera anywhere we want and try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. And this week we're finally covering Kingdom Hearts 1. I did an episode on 2 a long time ago, but thanks to camera creator Hebo, whose Patreon will be in the video description down below, we're going to look through all the environments and all the cutscenes of Kingdom Hearts 1 and just try to find anything that could be educational or truly bizarre. So with that said, let's get going. Alright, so the first thing that we want to talk about is an improperly mapped texture right at the very start of the game. The first platform that Sora ever touches foot on has a double up of this texture right here. Obviously, if you look at any of the other platforms, or even anywhere else on this platform, that texture doesn't show up, and so it's just a little bit of a graphical error on the part of the developers. And then we have Sora's Heartless over here. They store this model underneath the platform, and you can see all sorts of things like an animation that's starting to go off that resets very quickly, as well as the model in an A pose. It's pretty neat to look at. But from there, we're going to go to Destiny Island, and we're going to get a nice good close-up of one of the birds. Just because bird models are typically really far away and constantly moving, you don't get to see the details of the model themselves. And the seagull is pretty interesting. I say that because it's pretty high modeled, which is indicated by the feet that have a higher polygon count than what I normally see on the show. It also has a pretty solid texture that matches up with the tone and feel of the rest of the game. Then moving on, here's a cutscene from another angle. Normally here you'd see Sora and Riku running on the bridge, and then the camera would pan over to see them running towards the dock. But from this angle you could see the moment in time that they warp, and Sora's even sort of running into the shack, which is just pretty funny. And then when it cuts away to Mickey's kingdom, by having the camera at this angle, we can move the picture of the kingdom off its axis and reveal the in-game world is already loaded in and animating behind the scenes. You can only see this very briefly though, and you can't see much other than its evidence here at the top. And a lot of people were asking about these interior shots because you never get to explore it in Kingdom Hearts 1, unlike Kingdom Hearts 2. And I will tell you that outside of this one hallway, pretty much all of the models that were used were asset flipped into Kingdom Hearts 2. I can, however, show you this cutscene from another angle where Donald pulls Goofy away. You can see that Donald's just kind of standing there menacingly. Also, you can see where they go, which is inside of the fireplace. All right, anyways, with that said, let's do a zoom out of Destiny Island. Also, fun little fact, when Sora goes through this door, it triggers a cutscene where Donald and Goofy pop out and spout some dialogue at one another. Funny enough, if you were to move the camera during this exact moment, you can see that Sora is still in the scene, and Heartless will even attack him, which doesn't cause any damage. But what's really funny about it is that as these enemies interact with the model, it shoves him around and can even tuck him into the corner of the door frame. Now here's something that's really fascinating. This is my first instance of finding this, but it's in many places in Kingdom Hearts 1. Outside of the room in the 101 Dalmatians mansion, you can find 2 dev squares. What they could be is not entirely obvious, but if I had to guess, they could be stand-ins for skybox and something that hangs in the skybox like a sun or a moon. One of the squares just stays in place, and the other one just kind of does a rotation around the room. Something similar to this happens in Hollow Bastion as well. This one can be viewed by the player, and I wanted to take the camera over there to show you what the heck that square is, which in this instance is a texture for the skybox in a square form. And then in this scene where Riku opens his eyes in Hollow Bastion, the effect to make that happen is really interesting. See, panning the camera out can show you that there was a whole model made just for Riku's eyelids, and then they just placed this camera behind the eyelids to pull off this effect. Another fun little fact, at any given time, if you take the camera inside of Donald's hat, you can see that his head is fully modeled, which includes aspects of his feathers that would be incredibly difficult to see otherwise. Same can be said for Goofy as well. Taking the camera inside of his hat can show you the bump that fans of Goofy cartoons may even recognize. And if you're hoping to find some dev stuff out of bounds during cutscenes, you are in luck. There is a ton, and I mean a ton of stuff to look at. A lot of times they'll just be flat plains, but every single time there's a cutscene in Traverse Town, the devs use a barrel and oftentimes hide them underneath this staircase in front of Sid's shop. It should also be stated that whenever these cutscenes are over, those barrels disappear. Okay, now let's talk about Sora's bedroom. This is one insanely detailed room, I will say, for something that you never get to explore, and the camera only pans inside of it once, very briefly. There's a lot that you can see with just what the game provides to you alone, but there's also a lot of things you can't see at all. Some of those details being this block with a book and a cup on top, as well as these crude drawings of Sora on poster board. The list could even go on for quite a while, but one of the craziest things of all is that for some reason this room is doubled up, and there's even a player version of Sora tucked in between both rooms, which is very surprising. The key difference between the two rooms, though, is that the one on the left has closed windows and the one on the right has those windows open, which I guess instead of animating those windows to open, it was for some reason easier to just double up on the model instead. Okay, now let's take a little break from that to do some more funny shenanigans with cutscenes. Here's a scene where Aerith taps Donald Duck's shoulder and causes him to jump in the air. And I'll tell you, in order to line up Aerith's model in order to tap Donald Duck, I gotta say, I think Donald had every right to be terrified. Alright, anyways, checking out Merlin's tower for the first time. You can see all the objects that would be bouncing around in the room soon are stored underneath the map, along with just about everything else. In fact, when Merlin's done with his magic bag, that same bag gets stored out of bounds as well as just one book. Just one. Alright, let's do a zoom out of Mount Olympus, just so I can show you some of the stuff that you only see for a brief second when you open the doors to leave. It's kind of surprising that there's so much detail out here. In fact, when you do a tournament, yeah, you could see it briefly before you start a match, but there's a lot of details to the low poly version of the lobby that the player never gets to see, like a low texture of the ranking scrolls that whether or not you got to that part of the game in the high poly version of this area, the low poly version has it at any given time. And also that part where you drop into Alice's Wonderland, I wanted to show you what that looks like from Out of Bounds too, because it's kind of fascinating what the shape of this area looks like when you can see it all in one shot, sort of like a vase or something. And although I think it's shown very, very briefly, I also wanted to show you that there's a texture for a keyhole on the opposite side of the doorknob, despite the fact that he does not show you that same texture on his side of the door. And then moving on to Tarzan, if we take the camera out of this part of the map, you can see elements of the treehouse stored out of bounds. And this is a viewer request here. As always, you can follow me on Twitter, whether you want to just keep up with my opinions or just know what the next video is. One of the fun things that we do is that you can always let me know what you want to see in whatever episode I announce that I'm covering. And one of these requests was to take a zoom out of the tree slide sections of Tarzan's world. And it's richly detailed, but if you were hoping to see Sora slide around from a faraway distance, it's a little harder to do that because there's so much vegetation to the trees. And now let's do a zoom out of the waterfall area in Tarzan stage. And I'll tell you, it gets a little bit interesting because not only do you see that there's just a sheet of waterfall that is placed in front of the player, but the sky dome is also available in this area too, which that's kind of surprising, but then you start to realize like something's a bit off. And as you zoom the camera even further out, there's a transparent black cylinder that also wraps around this area. A lot of things I was not expecting to see for what is, I'm pretty sure, a completely opaque waterfall blocking off all of this detail. And heading back to the Coliseum real quick, one thing I was really surprised by is that just before Cloud is called in for his very first appearance in the game, he's hanging out of bounds. But not only that, he's sitting in a pose that is not in this scene whatsoever. It's almost as if the developers had a little bit of fun behind the scenes rather than being strictly business for this, because normally what you would expect to see is the first frame of his animation rather than the sitting pose. Also, when you beat that very same tournament, if you take the camera outside of the boundaries of the inside lobby, you can find an angry Donald Duck who is very unfortunately standing right between the legs of Hercules, who has a sword through his body. It's moments like this I wish there was an out of context boundary break account. And now here's something that's really, really cool, because it tells you a lot about how this game is made. Hades has a fire effect for his head. It's a really good effect, and I'm not knocking on that whatsoever. And one of the cool things on top of that is that when the character model gets turned invisible or get called out, the fire remains, and you can see that there's leftover animation based off of the movement of the hair that the player would never ever get to see, which with the right resources, it makes you wonder how many animations are made for this game that the player never gets a chance to see because the character is called out. Also in this scene right here, you can see what Hades' head looks like pretty much without the fire. I mean, the fire is still there, but because of the lighting contrast, you can see Hades baked in Widow's Peak. And then in the sewer area in Traverse Town, no matter which point you are in the game, if you take the camera out at the top of the staircase and go through the walls, you can see the gift that Kairi gives to Sora. And even when you get to the point in the game where Kairi is supposed to be with Sora, you can see that the gift does not leave that spot unless it's used in the cutscene. But what's interesting about it is that I believe the animation of this token is still attached to the Kyrie model, so when she's breathing, you can see the object moving in a similar pace. Next up is Agrabah, and this is another reviewer request. They wanted a zoom out of all of Agrabah to see if it's all loaded in at once, and it technically is. There's just a couple of things like objects within the map that don't show up in certain areas until you load it in. And that's what those loading zones are for. The reason why this even came up in the first place is because there is a certain part of the game where you're able to freely explore Agrabah without the weird transitions that seem to load the areas. But yeah, just know that Agrabah is pretty much loaded in once at all times. And then here's the genie cutscene from another angle. I wanted to show you this, to show you the pure chaos without any cutaways, but more importantly, once again, Donald is our test subject for the weirdest part of this cutscene, where Aladdin is actually in the scene as well, but the camera is supposed to be hyper focused on just the hand of Genie, which is why the rest of his body is completely immobile. And then here's another weird scene where if you look at it from out of bounds, you can see that Genie was holding Princess Jasmine. When the angle changes in certain ways, you could see that once again Princess Jasmine's completely immobile as Genie continues to move around freely. And of course, we gotta talk about the Cave of Wonders. So before you walk in, there's a modeling to the Cave of Wonders that the player has a hard time seeing, and it's pretty great. It's the staircase from the movie that goes all the way down, and I'm gonna take the camera outside of the mouth as well, just to kind of show you what it looks like in full, which is pretty cool. It looks like the Cave of Wonders has a neck. And then when you find the keyhole in Aladdin's world, a pile of money starts to rise up, and it's just one giant cuboid of gold. It's kind of fun to look at. And also, here's a zoom out of the entire carpet ride. This one does a much better job of giving you the whole scope of just how large this area is compared to something like Tarzan's world with the slopes. It's honestly insane. Now here's a zoom out of Monstro. I thought this would be really fun because you can see the inside of Monstro's mouth and his rib cage. So what would that look like all in one shot? And yeah, sadly it doesn't quite look like a whale, but you know, it's still fun to break that imagination. What about Atlantis in the Little Mermaid world? Sadly, the castle that's all the way in the background is just a flat 2D texture, which that makes sense. A lot of the area leading up to that spot is pretty complex. So even a low poly model for Atlantis would probably be a little too much for a PlayStation 2. Also in Ariel's hidden area, if you take the camera above the hole, you can see all of the coral reef that's on top. Sadly, there isn't too much more outside of that, but when you flip it on its head, it's sort of like a interesting mushroom top of some sort. While doing the zoom out, I found Ariel out of bounds. So that's pretty cool. Nice little bonus there. And if you get up to the tidal abyss, I want to show you what it looks like before you load in the tidal abyss. There's a surprising amount of area that's loaded in ahead of time, not including the poor unfortunate souls. But once you get in there, of course, they're over there, and I just want to take a nice good close-up of them, just because even in HD, they're a little bit hard to see. Anyways, moving on to the Nightmare Before Christmas world, and fans who have watched the Kingdom Hearts 2 episode many years ago might remember that one of the coolest discoveries in that episode was the fact that Dr. Finkelstein had eyes underneath his glasses, something that you don't really get to see, I'm pretty sure you never get to see actually, in the Nightmare Before Christmas. So the devs were probably privileged to see the model in its entirety, which allows us to see what Dr. Finkelstein's eyes would have looked like. Also at Oogie Boogie's hideout, there's a treasure chest inside of the level that goes completely unused, and that's including after you defeat Oogie Boogie, because there's different treasure chests there entirely. This one just straight up just is left in the center, never to be discovered. This is also pretty cool. Taking the camera through this area gives you a door that never opens, but I mean, if it did open, it would organically lead to another area of the map. And I swear, the Night Before Christmas world just happens to have a lot of unused content. If we take the camera inside of Shock's hat, we can see that her head is fully modeled, and that the hairs that come out of her hat don't go completely on top of her head. And in that very same room, a set piece from The Night Before Christmas goes completely unused in this game. There's a curtain here that hides all sorts of interesting stuff that you would see in the movie, like medieval weaponry. It also includes a chest with a skull and crossbones, as well as a ball and chain. Again, this content is completely unused and stored out of bounds. And to fulfill yet another viewer request, here's a look at the Oogie Boogie boss fight panned out so you can see the whole entire model in one shot. Now let's take a look at London. There's all sorts of models and stuff like that to check out, as well as an animated flag. But I think one of the most interesting things about this area is that if you take the camera inside of the Big Ben, there's a concaveness to the clock that I don't think is used. I think the devs could have just as easily replicated how the clock looks without these cones that are just behind it. And now we're over at Hollow Bastion. There's multiple instances and multiple models for the building of Hollow Bastion. Here's the one that's the furthest away that is supposed to have the entire image of the castle in one shot. A lot of it is low detail just from far away. So while there is some 3D geometry here, a lot of it is just flat textures. And the water and clouds that encapsulate the starting area is massive compared to the actual area that you're housed in. And then here's a zoom out of the castle when you first arrive to it. As you can see, a lot of the detail is where it is very close to Sora's line of sight, but the second you start getting a little bit further up than that, the detail starts to dissipate. And while there is a lot of geometry up here, there isn't enough to convince you that it's the same Hollow Bastion you just looked at a second ago. And here's the final cutscene where you can see Mickey through the crevice of the door of the final cutscene. Obviously, there's supposed to be a lot of ambiguity here and only giving the player a glimpse. But what's really cool is that when you take the camera over, you can see very strikingly that Mickey Mouse is wearing his classic outfit and not the ones that he would wear in the later parts of the series. But more importantly than that, taking the camera at different angles of Mickey's head can show you that they're trying to do the Mickey Mouse ear trick, and it looks really, really funny from another angle. Also, I hope that you can appreciate that while moving the camera around in here, you're also getting a good look at the area that you're not supposed to see, which just includes a lot of gray rocks with bright blue cracks in them. Nothing too interesting. And then we got the book for Winnie the Pooh. I think a lot of people just wanted to see a zoom out of this just to see how far the desk goes. And honestly, the desk does go pretty far. It's square instead of rectangular, but still, there's a lot more wood to the desk than a player would ever get to see on their own. And then I had this great request to see the Sephiroth fight just from far away. Normally I don't do that sort of thing, but I get it. I do. When you're in the thick of this fight, you're just focused on the combat and nothing else. On top of that, there's a lot of things that Sephiroth does that is big and sweeping, and you don't have the time, or even if you did have the time, it's not easy to see the full image of what he's doing in one shot. So that's what we're doing here. Now you can see these giant white blasts that he does. You can also see the meteor attack that he does, and this giant blue pulsating orb that goes above his head. These are all things that you just would not stop and smell the roses for. And now I'm going to let this fight play out for a little bit and just say thank you so much for watching. Guaranteed the next video you're probably going to see is my 1 million subscriber video. I need you fans to tell me what you think of this idea. It's sort of like a biography of the channel's ups and downs. Some of it gets really heavy, but I do worry that it might be such a stark contrast to the fun-loving vibe of the channel. So I need to see it in the comments. Do you guys want to see a raw, real biography of where Boundary Break got its start, all the bumps along the way, or do you want it to have something that has a little bit more of a fun vibe to it? Since it's supposed to be a celebration of 1 million subscribers, I get that some people would just want to keep the vibes really happy. So I would love to hear what you guys think. Anyways, guys, take care.